The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal towers of the Galactic Military Academy as students from dozens of worlds gathered for the new semester. The Academy sat on the peaceful planet of Kepler 442b, where 3 moons hung in the purple sky like glowing pearls. Ships from across the galaxy had been arriving for days, bringing the brightest young minds to learn the art of civilized warfare. Zara walked through the main courtyard with her study group. Her insect-like features gleamed in the sunlight as her 4 arms carried different data tablets. As a Zephyrian, she stood nearly 8 feet tall with blade-sharp limbs that could cut through metal. Her compound eyes tracked multiple conversations at once, while her mandibles clicked in what humans might mistake for aggression but was actually excitement. "I heard Professor Vex will announce the new curriculum changes today," she said to her friends. Nyx floated beside her in a clear mobility suit filled with blue-green water. The Nereidan's tentacles moved gracefully as she swam through the artificial environment that let her attend classes on dry land. Her large black eyes showed intelligence that had earned her top marks in tactical studies. Kyle walked on Zara's other side. The Altarian's tall, elegant form seemed to be made of living crystal that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. His people were known across the galaxy for their logical minds and perfect memory. His father commanded 3 star fleets, and Kyle planned to follow the same path. "My sources say they are removing something from the war studies program," Kyle said. With confidence, his crystal features showed slight amusement. Something about content being too inappropriate for academic study. The 3 friends entered the massive auditorium where thousands of students were taking their seats. The room could hold beings of all sizes and environmental needs. Atmospheric zones were carefully controlled so water breathers could sit next to methane breathers who sat next to oxygen breathers. Translation systems ensured everyone could understand each other perfectly. Professor Vexthal entered from the main stage. The distinguished Altarian had served in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy before becoming the Academy's most respected military historian. His crystal form was marked with the ritual scars that showed his rank and experience. Students fell silent as his presence commanded immediate attention. "Welcome to another year of learning the highest forms of military science," Professor Vexthal began. His voice carried easily through the translation systems. "This year we have students from 47 different worlds, all united in the pursuit of civilized warfare." He activated a holographic display that showed the semester's curriculum. Advanced strategy, fleet coordination, siege tactics, and diplomatic warfare filled the list. Students leaned forward eagerly until the professor reached an unusual announcement. "The Galactic Council has made an important decision regarding our historical studies program," he continued. "Effective immediately, all human combat footage has been removed from our archives and banned from classroom use." The auditorium erupted in surprised chatter. Many students had never even heard of humans, while others knew them only as a minor species from the Outer Rim territories. The professor waited for quiet before continuing. "The Council has determined that human warfare methods are too disturbing for academic study," he explained with clear distaste in his voice. "Their primitive approach to combat serves no educational purpose for civilized military minds." Zara raised one of her blade-like arms. "Professor, surely their methods are just crude brute force. How could such a backward species possibly teach advanced civilizations anything about warfare?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Several students laughed at the idea that humans could have anything valuable to contribute to military science. Their various species had been fighting wars for thousands of years using logic, strategy, and proper tactical doctrine. Kyle stood to address the professor. "My father served in the Outer Rim conflicts where he encountered human forces," he said. "They are barely more organized than wild animals when they fight. Their tactics make no logical sense." "Precisely why the footage was banned," Professor Vexthal replied with approval. "Their chaotic emotional approach to combat contradicts everything we teach about disciplined logical warfare. Human soldiers operate on instinct and irrational impulses rather than proper military doctrine." A student from the back called out, What kind of disturbing content could these primitives possibly create? More laughter followed as students imagined crude, aggressive displays that offended civilized sensibilities. The humans fight with an intensity that borders on madness, the professor explained. They continue fighting in situations where any logical species would surrender or retreat. They sacrifice themselves unnecessarily and make tactical decisions based on emotion rather than sound military principles. Nyx's tentacles moved thoughtfully in her water suit. If their methods are so obviously inferior, why ban them at all? Would it not serve better as an example of what not to do in proper warfare? An excellent question, the professor replied. However, the council felt that exposure to such primitive brutality might confuse young minds or give them incorrect ideas about the nature of honorable combat. The explanation satisfied most students who nodded in understanding. Advanced civilizations had moved beyond the crude violence that marked primitive species. Their warfare was elegant, efficient, and conducted according to strict rules that minimized unnecessary suffering while achieving clear objectives. The humans apparently have no concept of acceptable casualties or strategic withdrawal, Professor Vexthal continued. They fight until they are all dead rather than accepting logical defeat. Such behavior serves no military purpose and teaches us nothing about proper tactical thinking. Students throughout the auditorium shook their heads in disgust or amazement at such backward thinking. Their own species had learned to fight wars with minimal losses using superior technology and careful planning. The idea of continuing hopeless battles made no sense to minds trained in logical analysis. Furthermore, human combat footage contains graphic violence that the council deemed unsuitable for academic viewing, the professor added. Unlike civilized warfare, which seeks to achieve objectives with minimum force, humans seem to embrace brutality as an end in itself. As the lecture continued with the actual curriculum announcement, most students had already dismissed humans as an irrelevant primitive species, whose crude methods had nothing to teach the galaxy's future military leaders. They focused instead on learning proper strategy from species that had mastered the art of civilized warfare, but in small groups throughout the auditorium. A few students exchanged curious glances. If human methods were truly as worthless as described, why did the Galactic Council feel the need to ban them completely? The ban itself suggested there might be more to human warfare than simple primitive brutality the semester had begun with. What most students considered a minor administrative change. None of them suspected that this seemingly insignificant ban would soon lead to discoveries that would shake their understanding of warfare itself. 3 weeks passed since Professor Vexthal's announcement about the human combat ban. The initial laughter and dismissive comments had faded, but something unexpected was happening in the dormitories and study halls. Students found themselves returning to the topic of humans again and again, despite having supposedly dismissed them as primitive. Zara sat in the common area of the Zephyrian dormitory wing. Her compound eyes scanned multiple data tablets while her friends discussed their latest tactical analysis assignment. The room was designed for insect-like beings with reinforced surfaces that could handle their sharp limbs and higher gravity preferences. "I've been thinking about what Professor Vexthal said," Zara announced during a pause in their conversation. "If human warfare is truly as worthless as described, why does the Galactic Council care enough to ban it?" Her friend Quendel looked up from his own studies. The young Zephyrian's mandibles clicked thoughtfully as he considered the question. "In our culture, knowledge that is forbidden is knowledge that is feared. If humans truly fight like mindless beasts, there would be no need to hide their methods. Perhaps they fight so badly that watching them would be embarrassing," suggested another student. "Maybe the council wants to protect human dignity by not letting us see how incompetent they are." Zara's primary arms gestured dismissively, while her secondary arms continued working on her tablets. "That makes no sense. The galaxy studies failures all the time to learn what not to do. We have entire courses on military disasters and tactical mistakes." The conversation was interrupted when Nyx arrived. Her mobility suit glided smoothly into the common area as she joined their discussion. The Nereidan's tentacles moved in patterns that showed she had been thinking about similar questions. I spoke with students from other species, Nix reported. Many are asking the same questions we are. The ban has created more interest in humans than existed before the announcement. What kind of questions? Quindle asked with growing interest. Why ban something that serves no educational purpose? Why not simply ignore it if it has no value? The Council's action suggests humans pose some kind of threat to our understanding of warfare, Nix explained. Kyle arrived as she finished speaking. The Altarian's crystal features showed unusual uncertainty, which was rare for his logical species. I contacted my father to ask about his experiences with human forces. His response was very strange. The group leaned forward with curiosity. Kyle's father commanded respect throughout the galaxy as a brilliant tactical mind. His opinions on military matters were considered almost infallible by Altarian standards. He told me never to ask about humans again, Kyle continued. When I pressed for details, he said there are some things that young minds should not learn. Too early in their development. He seemed almost disturbed by my questions. That makes no sense, Zara said with frustration. Your father has discussed every type of warfare with you since childhood. He never avoided difficult topics before. Exactly what I thought, Kyle agreed. Something about humans affects even experienced commanders in ways they do not want to. Explain. This ban is not about protecting us from primitive violence. The four friends sat in thoughtful silence as they considered the implications. Around them, other study groups were having similar conversations in dozens of languages. The mysterious ban had accomplished the opposite of its intended effect by making humans a subject of intense curiosity throughout the Academy. I have an idea, Nix said carefully. My species has certain advantages when it comes to accessing restricted information. Nereidan data networks operate differently than most galactic systems. She explained that her people's aquatic nature had led them to develop information systems that flowed like water through hidden channels. These networks were often overlooked by security systems designed for more conventional data storage methods. You want to find the banned footage, Zara realized. Her mandibles clicked rapidly with excitement and nervousness. If human warfare is truly as meaningless as they claim, then watching it should only confirm what we have been told, Nix reasoned. But if there is something more, then we deserve to know what we are being protected from. Kyle's crystal features brightened with interest. The Academy's main archives would be impossible to access, but there might be backup copies in secondary storage systems. Graduate students often keep research materials that do not get properly deleted. This could get us expelled, Quindle warned. Accessing banned materials violates multiple Academy regulations. Only if we get caught, Zara replied. And only if the materials are actually dangerous rather than just embarrassing to humans. The group spent the next several days carefully investigating. Nix used her species' unique data networks to trace references to human combat footage in various academic archives. Most had been thoroughly purged, but she found traces that suggested copies might still exist in forgotten storage locations. Kyle contributed his family's military connections to learn more about the ban's origins. He discovered that the decision had been made quickly and with unusual secrecy. Normally, such curriculum changes went through extensive committee review, but the human footage ban had been implemented by direct council order. Zara and Quindle reached out to students from other worlds to gauge interest in their investigation. They were surprised to find dozens of young beings who shared their curiosity about the forbidden human materials. The ban had created an underground network of students who wanted to learn what they were being prevented from seeing. I found something, Nix announced during one of their secret meetings. A graduate student named Veltar had copies of several human combat recordings for a research project that was canceled when the ban took effect. Can we access them? Kyle asked. Veltar graduated last year, but left his research files in a storage facility in the Academy's lower levels. The area is scheduled for cleaning next month, so the files should still be there. What kind of recordings? Zara wanted to know. Nix consulted her datapad. Something called Operation Overlord, Battle of Stalingrad, Siege of Fallujah, and Defense of Outpost Charlie 7. The file notes describe them as representative examples of human military doctrine. The names meant nothing to any of them, but the prospect of finally learning the truth about human warfare was irresistible. They agreed to meet that evening in the abandoned storage area to view whatever they could find. This should settle the question once and for all, Quindle said as they prepared to leave. Either we will see primitive brutality that justifies the ban, or we will discover why the Galactic Council really wants this information hidden. Either way, we will finally have answers, Kyle added. I am tired of wondering what makes humans so different that their warfare methods cannot be studied openly. As evening approached, the four friends made their way separately to the lower levels of the academy. Each carried analysis equipment that would let them study whatever they were about to see from multiple tactical perspectives. They expected to spend a few hours confirming what they had been told about human primitiveness. None of them suspected they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change their understanding of warfare itself. The storage facility in the Academy's lower levels was dark and filled with outdated equipment that had been forgotten by maintenance crews. Zara activated her natural night vision while Nyx's suit provided illumination for the others. The air smelled of dust and old metal as they set up their viewing equipment in a corner surrounded by data storage containers. I found Veltar's research files, Kyle announced as his crystal fingers interfaced directly with an abandoned storage unit. There are dozens of recordings here labeled with human military operations spanning several of their centuries. Quindle connected their portable display system while Zara arranged analysis equipment that would let them study tactical formations and weapon effectiveness. Nyx floated nearby in her mobility suit, reviewing the file descriptions on her data pad. The recordings appeared to be authentic military documentation rather than entertainment or propaganda, she reported. Veltar's notes indicate they were obtained through official channels before the ban took effect. What should we watch? First, Zara asked as she finished setting up sensors that would track her physiological responses to whatever they were about to see. Her species was known for maintaining emotional control during combat analysis, but she wanted objective data on her reactions. Kyle consulted the file list. Operation Overlord seems to be marked as a significant amphibious assault. The date suggests it occurred during what humans call their Second World War. Perfect, Quindle agreed. Amphibious operations are complex tactical situations. If humans are as primitive as claimed, this should demonstrate their lack of proper military planning. The group settled into their positions as the first recording began to play. The display showed grainy footage that appeared to be taken from various recording devices during an actual military operation. The image quality was poor by galactic standards, but clear enough to follow the action. Look at their equipment, Zara observed with initial amusement. Those boats are barely more advanced than what our ancestors used thousands of years ago. Their weapons appear to be simple projectile launchers. The recording showed thousands of human soldiers preparing to assault a heavily defended coastline. The humans looked fragile compared to most galactic species with no natural armor or enhanced physical capabilities. Their technology seemed crude, and their formations appeared chaotic to eyes trained in proper military doctrine. This is exactly what we expected, Kyle said confidently. They are charging directly into defensive positions without proper support or logical tactical planning. Any civilized species would have found a better approach. But as the assault began, something changed in the room's atmosphere. The students watched as the first boats reached the shore and came under devastating enemy fire. Human soldiers fell in shocking numbers as defensive weapons cut through their ranks like harvesting tools through grain. They are taking massive casualties, Nyx observed with growing concern. Their losses are approaching 60% in the first wave. Any logical military force would retreat and reassess. Instead of retreating, the humans continued advancing. More boats arrived bringing fresh soldiers, who stepped over the bodies of their fallen comrades and pushed forward into the same deadly fire. The students watched in growing disbelief as wave after wave of humans threw themselves against the defensive positions. "This makes no tactical sense," Quindle said with confusion in his voice. "They must realize their assault is failing." "Why? Are they not withdrawing to preserve forces for alternative strategies?" Zara's compound eyes tracked multiple aspects of the battle simultaneously. "Look at their faces. They are terrified, but they keep moving forward anyway. What kind of training produces such behavior?" The recording showed close views of individual human soldiers as they advanced under fire. Their expressions showed fear, determination, and something else that the alien students could not identify. These were not mindless beasts attacking on instinct, but thinking beings making conscious choices to continue despite overwhelming odds. There, Kyle pointed to a section of the display. That human just used his wounded comrade's body as cover to advance his position. That actually shows tactical thinking under extreme pressure. The students began to notice details they had missed during their initial dismissive viewing. Human soldiers were adapting their tactics in real time, using terrain features effectively, and coordinating attacks despite chaos and massive casualties. Their equipment might be primitive, but their tactical flexibility was impressive. "Watch this section again," Nix requested as she replayed a segment showing a small group of humans who had become separated from their main force. "They are completely surrounded and outnumbered, but they are still fighting with coordinated precision." The isolated humans had taken shelter in a shell crater and were directing covering fire to help other soldiers advance. They knew their position was hopeless, but continued fighting until the last one fell. Their sacrifice bought precious time for other units to establish better positions. "I do not understand their motivation," Zara admitted as her analysis equipment registered her increasing agitation. "They are dying for no logical military purpose. Those soldiers gained nothing tactical by sacrificing themselves. But they did gain something," Quindle realized with growing horror. "They bought time for others to advance. They chose certain death to give their comrades better chances of success." The recording continued showing scene after scene of similar sacrifices. Human soldiers threw themselves on explosive devices to protect their comrades. Medics ran into deadly fire to treat wounded fighters. Officers led charges they knew would probably kill them to inspire their troops to follow. "This is not primitive brutality," Kyle said quietly as his crystal features dimmed with shock. "This is something else entirely. They are fighting with purpose and intelligence, but their priorities are completely different from anything we have studied." The climax of the recording showed the successful establishment of beachheads despite enormous casualties. The humans had achieved their objective through sheer determination and willingness to accept losses that would have broken any other species. Their tactical victory came at a cost that defied logical military thinking. "They won," Nix whispered in amazement. "Despite losing thousands of soldiers and using primitive equipment, they actually accomplished their mission." "How is that possible?" Zara demanded. "Their casualty rates should have caused complete unit breakdown. No species can maintain combat effectiveness while taking such losses." "But humans did maintain effectiveness," Quindle pointed out. "Look at the final scenes. The surviving soldiers are already preparing for the next phase of their campaign. They are not traumatized or demoralized by the massive casualties they witnessed." The recording ended, leaving the storage facility in complete silence. The four students stared at the blank display, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Everything they had been taught about logical warfare and acceptable casualties had been challenged by watching humans fight. "I need to see more," Zara finally said. "One recording might be an exception or special circumstance. We need to study additional examples to understand if this represents normal human military behavior." "Are you sure?" Nix asked with concern evident in her voice. "If all human warfare follows similar patterns, this could be very disturbing to analyze." "That is exactly why we need to continue," Kyle insisted. "If humans routinely fight in ways that contradict established military doctrine, we need to understand how and why they do it." Quindle was already loading the next recording labeled Battle of Stalingrad. Professor Vextel was wrong about humans being primitive. They may be something much worse than primitive. They may be something we do not understand at all. The second recording began with aerial footage of a massive human city that had been reduced to rubble and flames. The Battle of Stalingrad file showed urban warfare on a scale that shocked the students even after witnessing the beach assault. Entire city blocks had been destroyed while fighting raged through the ruins with an intensity that seemed impossible to sustain. The strategic situation is completely hopeless, Quindle analyzed as he studied the tactical displays. The human defenders are surrounded, outnumbered by at least 3-1, and cut off from supplies. Any logical military force would surrender to preserve lives for future conflicts. Zara's compound eyes tracked the movement of small human units through the destroyed buildings. Look at their defensive positions. They are fighting for every room, every staircase, every basement. This level of resistance makes no tactical sense when the overall battle is already lost. The recording showed human soldiers who had been fighting continuously for weeks without relief or adequate food. Their faces were gaunt with exhaustion and their equipment was damaged and improvised. Yet they continued fighting with a ferocity that defied their physical condition. "There is a human sniper in that building," Nix observed as she followed the action on her display. "He has been in the same position for 4 days according to the timestamp. No relief, no resupply, just shooting at enemies while they try to locate and eliminate him." The sniper was a young human male named Jake Collins, whose rifle had claimed dozens of enemy soldiers. The recording showed him eating cold rations and drinking dirty water while maintaining his position. His hands shook from fatigue, but his aim remained deadly accurate. Why has he not withdrawn to a safer position? Kyle wondered aloud. He must know that staying in one location for so long makes him easy to find. His tactical value would be better preserved by relocating frequently. The answer came when the recording showed what Jake was protecting. Below his position, a group of human civilians, including children, were hiding in a basement shelter. The sniper was not just fighting enemies, but holding a position that kept non-combatants safe from discovery. He is sacrificing tactical advantage to protect people who have no military value, Zara realized with growing disturbance. This contradicts every principle of logical resource allocation in warfare. The students watched Jake's final battle, as enemy soldiers finally located his position. Wounded and outnumbered, he fought with nothing but a combat knife when his ammunition ran out. His last transmission to his unit was simply, "Tell my mom I kept my promise." What promise could be worth dying for? Quindle asked. But none of his friends could answer. The urban fighting continued with scene after scene of similar sacrifices. Human soldiers held impossible positions not for tactical advantage but because retreat would expose civilians to danger. They shared their limited food with non-combatants, even when they were starving themselves. Look at this section. Nix directed their attention to footage of human medics working in the ruins. They are treating wounded civilians and enemy soldiers, along with their own forces. They are using medical supplies on people who provide no military benefit. A human medic named Lisa Carter was shown working continuously for 18 hours treating anyone who needed help. She had been wounded herself, but continued operating on others until she collapsed from blood loss and exhaustion. She died saving people who could not contribute to the war effort. Kyle observed with something approaching horror in his voice. Her medical skills would have been valuable for treating combat soldiers, but she wasted them on useless casualties. Unless their definition of waste is different from ours, Zara suggested thoughtfully. What if humans consider civilian lives to be worth protecting regardless of military utility? The concept was so alien to galactic military thinking that the students struggled to process it. Every species they knew prioritized military objectives over non-essential personnel during wartime. Resources were allocated based on tactical value and strategic importance. The recording moved to its climax, showing the final phase of the siege. Human defenders were reduced to fighting with improvised weapons and bare hands when their equipment failed. They constructed barricades from rubble and furniture while their city burned around them. They are still fighting, Nix whispered in amazement. After months of siege with massive casualties and no hope of victory, they are still resisting. What drives them to continue when any logical species would have surrendered? A human commander named Colonel Jim Murphy was shown addressing his remaining troops in a bombed-out building. His words were translated through the Academy systems. We fight not because we can win, but because some things are worth fighting for even when winning is impossible. That makes no sense, Quindle protested. Fighting without possibility of victory is just wasteful destruction of resources. Unless the fighting itself serves a purpose beyond victory, Kyle suggested with growing unease. What if humans value the act of resistance more than the outcome of resistance? The siege footage ended with scenes of human survivors who had held their positions for over 6 months against impossible odds. They had suffered casualties that would have broken any other species but maintained unit cohesion and fighting spirit until the siege was finally lifted by reinforcements. Load the next recording, Zara demanded, despite the visible strain on her features. I need to know if this pattern continues in other conflicts. The third file showed footage from something called the Siege of Fallujah. This was more recent than the previous recordings and showed humans fighting with better equipment and technology. The students hoped to see more conventional military behavior from humans, who had access to modern weapons. Instead, they witnessed urban combat that was even more intense than Stalingrad. Human forces cleared buildings room by room, house by house, in fighting that was brutally close and personal. They took enormous risks to minimize civilian casualties, even when it meant exposing themselves to greater danger. They are using advanced weapons, but their tactical choices are even more extreme, Nix observed with growing panic in her voice. Watch this unit. They are advancing through a building they know contains enemy fighters because they received reports of civilians trapped inside. A squad led by Sergeant Tony Garcia fought through 3 floors of defended positions to reach a family hiding in an upper room. 2 soldiers died in the rescue, but they successfully evacuated 4 non-combatants who had no military value whatsoever. This is not warfare, Kyle said with his crystal features flickering erratically. This is something else that we do not have words for. They are fighting according to principles that contradict every military doctrine in the galaxy. The final recording was labeled Defense of Outpost Charlie 7 and showed recent footage of humans defending an isolated research station. Captain Lisa Morgan commanded 20 human soldiers against an attacking force of over 300 enemies. Equipped with superior weapons, the students watched the 6-day battle with growing horror. As the small human force used tactics that shifted fluidly between conventional warfare, guerrilla fighting, and pure improvisation, they turned their research station into a fortress and made every inch of ground cost the attackers dearly. Their defensive coordinator is brilliant, Zara admitted reluctantly. Captain Morgan is using terrain, limited resources, and tactical flexibility to multiply her force's effectiveness by factors that should be impossible. When the humans ran low on ammunition, they began making improvised explosives from research chemicals. When their communications failed, they used light signals and hand gestures to coordinate attacks. When their defensive positions were overrun, they fell back to secondary positions they had prepared in advance. They planned for every contingency, including their own defeat, Quindle realized with amazement. Even when facing certain death, they maintained tactical discipline and continued fighting effectively. The recording ended with the arrival of human reinforcements who found that Captain Morgan and her soldiers had held their position against impossible odds. Only 6 of the original 20 defenders survived, but they had inflicted casualties on the attackers that far exceeded any reasonable military calculation. The storage facility fell silent as the 4 students tried to comprehend what they had witnessed. Hours of footage had shattered every assumption they held about human military capabilities and motivations. We have been studying warfare wrong, Kyle finally whispered. All of us. Every species in the galaxy. We think war is about achieving objectives with minimal cost, but humans fight as if some objectives are worth any cost. They do not fight to win, Nyx added with trembling tentacles. They fight because something matters more to them than winning, more than surviving, more than logical military thinking. Now I understand why the footage was banned, Zara concluded with horror growing in her voice. Not because humans are primitive, but because they represent a form of warfare so psychologically devastating that it could change how we think about everything. The storage facility remained silent for nearly an hour after the final recording ended. 4 of the galaxy's brightest military students sat motionless as their minds struggled to process what they had witnessed. The portable display screen showed only blank static, but the images of human warfare continued playing in their thoughts. Zara was the first to move. Her blade-like arms trembled as she began shutting down the analysis equipment. The data her sensors had collected showed physiological stress patterns that would normally indicate exposure to severe trauma. Yet, what had traumatized her was not violence, but the realization that everything she understood about warfare was fundamentally flawed. "I cannot stop thinking about that sniper Jake Collins," she said quietly. Her mandibles clicked with nervous energy as she spoke. He knew staying in position would get him killed, but he did it anyway to protect civilians who had no military value. In our tactical training, such behavior would be classified as mental breakdown or command failure. Quindle slowly disconnected the projection system while his own hands shook with residual shock. The medic Lisa Carter died treating enemy wounded and non-combatants instead of preserving her skills for strategic personnel. Every military doctrine in the galaxy would call that resource waste, but humans seemed to consider it necessary. "Captain, Morgan's defense of the research station violates our understanding of acceptable casualty ratios," Nyx added as her tentacles moved in agitated patterns within her mobility suit. "She achieved tactical victory through methods that should have resulted in complete unit breakdown and mission failure." Kyle remained motionless for several more minutes before finally speaking. His crystal features had dimmed to barely visible levels as his mind processed implications that challenged his species' fundamental approach to logical thinking. "I need to access restricted historical files," he announced suddenly. "If human warfare consistently follows these patterns, there should be records of previous conflicts that were hidden along with the combat footage." Using his family's military access codes, Kyle connected to classified databases that contained information about human contact with various galactic civilizations. What he found confirmed their worst fears about the implications of what they had witnessed. The Draconian Empire first encountered human colony ships 47 years ago, he read from the restricted files. Initial contact reports described humans as a primitive species with crude technology and aggressive tendencies. Draconian forces moved to claim human territory, expecting easy conquest of defenseless settlements. What happened, Zara asked, though. She suspected she already knew the answer. The Draconians had better weapons, better shields, better everything, Kyle continued reading. But they could not understand why humans would ram damaged colony ships directly into Draconian dreadnoughts rather than surrender. Human tactics made no logical sense, but they achieved results that defied military probability calculations. The files contained engagement after engagement where human forces faced technologically superior opponents and achieved impossible victories through sheer determination and tactical flexibility. Every major galactic power had learned to avoid human territory, not because humans had better weapons, but because the cost of fighting them was always higher than any potential prize. Look at this casualty analysis from the Centauri conflict. Nyx directed their attention to a particularly disturbing data file. Human forces took 91% casualties in the final battle, but inflicted enough damage on Centauri fleets that they withdrew from the entire sector. 91% casualties and they still won, Quindle repeated with disbelief. No species in the galaxy can maintain combat effectiveness after losing 9 out of every 10 soldiers. But humans did maintain effectiveness, Kyle pointed out. The surviving 9% continued fighting until they achieved their objectives. The psychological impact on Centauri forces was so severe that they refused to engage humans in any future conflicts. The students began to understand the true reason for the combat footage ban. The Galactic Council feared that studying human warfare methods might inspire other species to adopt similar attitudes about sacrifice, determination, and fighting for principles rather than tactical advantages. There is a classified memo here from the Council's Military Advisory Committee, Zara discovered as she accessed additional restricted files. It recommends that human combat techniques be studied only by senior strategists with appropriate psychological conditioning to prevent ideological contamination. Ideological contamination, Nix repeated the phrase with growing horror. They are afraid that learning about human methods will change how we think about the purpose of warfare itself. The memo explained that exposure to human military footage had caused several promising young officers from various species to suffer what the Council termed tactical philosophy disorder. These officers had begun questioning established military doctrines and advocating for strategic approaches that prioritized mission accomplishment over casualty minimization. The Council considers human warfare methods to be a form of mental virus that spreads through military organizations, Quindall realized. They banned the footage not to protect us from graphic content but to prevent us from being infected by human ideas about duty and sacrifice. Kyle found additional files that contained transcripts of interviews with galactic military personnel who had fought alongside or against human forces. The interviews revealed a consistent pattern of psychological impact that went far beyond normal combat stress. Listen to this statement from a vegan naval commander, he read aloud. After watching human Marines defend a space station until they all died rather than allowing enemy capture, he said he could never again order a strategic withdrawal without feeling like a coward. Or this report from an Altarian general who observed human ground forces, Zara added. He requested transfer to non-combat duties because he found himself unable to make logical tactical decisions after seeing humans choose certain death over mission failure. The evidence was overwhelming. Human warfare methods produce psychological effects on other species that fundamentally altered their approach to military command. The Council had banned human combat footage because exposure to it was causing ideological changes in the galaxy's military leadership. We can never speak of this to anyone, Nix said, but her words carried no conviction. If other students learn what we have discovered, it could spread throughout the academy. But perhaps it should spread, Quindall suggested quietly. If human methods are more effective than our conventional tactics, maybe we should be learning from them instead of hiding from them. Are you prepared for the consequences of thinking like a human? Kyle asked with genuine concern. Can you imagine ordering soldiers to fight until they all die, because the mission matters more than their lives? The question hung in the air as each student considered what they had learned. Human warfare was not primitive or brutal in the way they had expected. It was psychologically devastating because it demonstrated levels of dedication and sacrifice that made conventional military thinking seem cowardly by comparison. I understand now why my father refused to discuss humans, Kyle said as they prepared to leave the storage facility. He was protecting me from knowledge that would change how I view military service. Once you have seen humans fight, everything else seems like playing games with toy soldiers. As they gathered their equipment and prepared to return to their dormitories, the 4 students realized their military education had been fundamentally altered. They could never again approach tactical problems with the same logical detachment they had been taught to value. What will you do with this knowledge? Zara asked. As they reached the exit, I do not know, Nix admitted. But I know I cannot pretend I never saw it. Every tactical decision I make from now on will be measured against what humans would do in the same situation. They walked back to their dormitories in silence, carrying the weight of terrible new understanding. In the distance they could hear other students laughing about the primitive human band, unaware that they were mocking the most psychologically devastating warriors the galaxy had ever encountered. The band had failed in its purpose. Instead of protecting 4 promising young officers from dangerous ideas, it had created 4 converts to a way of thinking that would spread through their future commands like wildfire. The footage was banned because humans represented warfare. so pure and uncompromising that it exposed the limitations of every other military philosophy in the galaxy. They had learned why humans were truly feared across the stars. Not because they were primitive, but because they had turned warfare into something approaching religious devotion where victory mattered less than the willingness to sacrifice everything for principles that transcended individual survival.